So it's game 7 of the NBA Finals, the championship game. Okay? The home team is down by 2 points. The game is on the line, and the star player is fouled on a potentially game-tying 3-point shot. So he steps up to the free throw line with 1 second left on the clock in the game. The home crowd holds its breath. The entire season comes down to this moment. He steps up to the foul line. He shoots. And then he misses. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. The arena gasps in horror and groans of frustration and disappointment. Ultimately, in an arena of 23,000 people, falls silent. Pictures of crying fans. And the player just stands there, hanging his head in shame. Tears begin streaming down his face as he slowly makes his way into the tunnel. The one who was supposed to carry the team collapses in the moment of greatest and most intense pressure. And that's exactly where we find the Apostle Peter here in John 18. The leader of the 12, the one who just hours earlier, unhesitatingly in the upper room, swore to Jesus, "Lord, I will lay down my life for you." The disciple who just hours earlier had drawn his sword in the Garden of Gethsemane, ready to take the life of one of the soldiers. And here he is now, reduced to trembling in the flicker of a firelight when a mere servant girl raises a simple question. "You are not one of his disciples also, are you?" The one who swore he would die for Jesus can't even at the very least admit that he knows him. Peter, Petros, the rock, crumbles. His fear silences his faith. This is one of the most tragic and famous moments in all the Gospels. It is the threefold denial of Peter. All 4 Gospel writers record it, and John specifically interweaves Peter's denial with Jesus' interrogation before Annas, highlighting a stark contrast. Peter denies everything, while Jesus denies nothing. And yet, this is more than just a tragic gospel moment in history. It's a mirror. It's a mirror. Because Peter's failure is not unique to him, is it? It is universal. Every single disciple of Jesus, like you and like me, knows what it means to stumble, to fear, and to falter, and to stay silent when your faith should otherwise speak. And yet Jesus will not leave Peter ultimately in failure. No, the rooster's crow is not the end of his story, nor is it the end of your story. Before the rooster crows, Peter shows us how fear silences faith. And yet after the rooster crows, and after sorrowful repentance and tears, Jesus shows us that his grace, the grace of God, is greater than our grossest failures, powerful to forgive and to restore us back into faithful communion and fellowship with him. That's the message of our text this morning, and we pick it up in verse 15, briefly verse 12, which we'll go back to next week. Jesus has just been arrested, betrayed, arrested, and taken. Verse 12, so the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First, they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people, and unbeknownst to him becomes a prophet in and of himself of the one sacrifice for many, who is Jesus of Nazareth. So they bring him to Annas first, a sort of pre-official trial in his courtyard, in his house before Caiaphas, and then ultimately a few hours later when all the Sanhedrin, or some of the Sanhedrin, will arrive for that kangaroo court trial of Jesus. And then verse 15. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. And so here you see Peter and another disciple following Jesus, following the band of Roman soldiers and the temple guards who are now escorting him to the father of the high priest, Annas, his house, his courtyard. And they're following Jesus. You don't see it here, but in Mark and Matthew's account, they say following Jesus at a distance is the key. You see here, Peter and evidently this other disciple are still demonstrating some kind of courage, some kind of devotion. Where the others have already fled, Peter is sticking around. He's still following. So there's something there. But notice the key here is it's at a distance. He's following Jesus at a distance that is safe enough for him so that he is not closely identified with Jesus, lest he too be arrested and worse. He's lagging just far enough behind for his safety. He wants to be close to Jesus, but not close enough to experience the reproach of Jesus. There's a big difference. That's Peter at this point. And the other disciple. And this other disciple evidently was known to the high priest, which means knows the high priest. And it's through this connection that he manages to get inside the high priest's courtyard, through the gate. Who is this? Another disciple? We can only speculate, though traditional interpretation identifies him with the beloved disciple, the unnamed disciple, the one whom John identifies as the beloved disciple, and whom we know is John the apostle and the gospel writer of this gospel here. I think it's most likely John. And John somehow has a connection to the high priest. You say, that's unlikely. How would this son of a fisherman know any religious or priestly elite in Jerusalem? He's not even from Jerusalem or Judea. He's from Galilee. Well, we know that John comes from a somewhat wealthy family. John and James, their father had other hired workers, which means he had quite a good boating business, and it was not uncommon for more peasants who knew a trade to mix and mingle with the religious or political elite in Jerusalem and Israel. In fact, rabbis, according to the Mishnah and tradition, were also required to learn a trade. Even the Apostle Paul, who was a Pharisee, who was a lawyer, a scribe, an expert in the law, he too had a trade, didn't he? He was a tent maker. So it's not far-fetched. And so Peter's there outside, notice, standing outside the door. He's outside the door. The other disciple goes in. And you see a contrast here already between this nameless disciple and his actions and Peter's. Peter is following at a distance, and he's still reluctant to go inside until the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, verse 16, comes back to the gate and speaks to the servant girl who was assigned to watch the door, to monitor who's coming in and who's going out, to provide access to the high priest's house. This nameless disciple comes back, speaks to her, and then Peter is allowed access into the courtyard. And then verse 17. Verse 17. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. This tells us that it's nighttime. It would be rather hot during the day during March and April and the festival of the Passover, but at night it would get quite cool, and they would need to start a fire to warm themselves, and that's what the servants of the high priest and this lady, this girl, keeping watch at the door are doing. They are warming themselves, notice, by a charcoal fire. And that word is important too. It's the one of two occurrences exclusively in the New Testament. We're going to see this word for charcoal fire come again in a couple chapters, in chapter 21, verse 9, with respect to Peter's next encounter with Jesus. So take note of that. But Peter is here among them. And he too is warming himself at the fire. And suddenly the servant girl, who's 15, 16 years old maybe, comes up to him and asks him a question. "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" And the way the grammar is constructed in the Greek basically demands a negative answer, like, you can't also be one of his disciples. Also, are you? And Peter gives her a negative answer. "I am not. I am not." Contrast that with Jesus in the garden as Judas and the temple officers and Roman soldiers come to arrest him. "Who are you searching for?" he asks them. And they say, "Jesus of Nazareth." And 3 times he says, "I am he." Peter here 3 times will say, "I am not. I am not." And now his fear comes full surface. Is he scared that he'll be identified here among the high priest's servants in the high priest's house? Especially knowing it was one of the high priest's servants whose ear he sliced off, Malchus. The fear of being identified, of being caught, or worse. He says no to this servant girl. And it's not even a hostile question is the idea in the Greek here. It's rather like, "Hey, I saw you come in with John. I know John is one of his disciples here, this unnamed, another disciple. He came back to let you in to say, he's my guy, let him in. So I'm just asking you an obvious question. Are you also a follower of Jesus? No harm, no foul." And to this innocent question, from an innocent servant girl, Peter shrinks back in fear. "No, I am not," he says. "I am not." Imagine this. Imagine where Peter's understanding and the level of his faith currently is. He's following at a distance. He's afraid to get close enough. He wants the blessing and association of Jesus, but not close enough to also bear the reproach and suffering of Jesus. He's like a child learning to swim. Some of you have kids and have seen your kids learning to swim. I remember when mine were younger, and they still are. You're in the pool with them, and they're clutching and clinging to the ledge. And then they come out just for a second, and your arms are right there to catch them, lest they go underwater. And they come out for a second, but immediately they reach back and grab the ledge. They want the joy of the water without the risk of sinking in. That's Peter. That's Peter. He doesn't yet understand, despite his earlier brazen claims, that Christ must first die for him before he can live for Christ. He's got it backwards. Backwards. You are not one of his disciples too, are you? I am not. What a small test. A meager servant girl asking a simple question of association because he's with this other disciple of Jesus, and he falters. And it's like that often, isn't it? That the greatest failures come in the smallest tests. A small compromise at work, in the office. A small silence among friends when you know you should speak. A quick denial of your Christian convictions when someone presses you about what you believe. That's how they come. Small. It's not often the lion's den that silences your faith, but the meager, lowly servant doorkeeper's question. And that's how it was for Peter. That's how it was for Peter. Contrast that with Jesus. Look at verse 19. And these scenes are happening simultaneously. You harmonize the Gospels, and Mark tells us Jesus is on the second floor, on the balcony. And sure, it starts with Annas, and then it goes to Caiaphas, and then the rest, or at least a good representative of the Sanhedrin, come and start interrogating him. He's on the balcony there. Peter's in the courtyard, warming himself by the fire. And in verse 19, the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple, where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. Wow. The irony is thick in the air. Jesus here has no problem identifying his person and his doctrine. And then you have Peter, who out of fear will not identify with Jesus. Jesus says, I am. Peter says, I am not. Jesus affirms everything to be true about his person and his message and his ministry. Peter denies everything. Jesus denies nothing. Peter, the rock, the Petros, crumbles under interrogation. And Jesus, the true cornerstone, resolutely and boldly tells the truth. And the responses couldn't be more opposite. They couldn't be more opposite. And the irony even further is that Jesus in verse 21 is appealing to Peter. He says, ask those who are with me. Who's those who are with me? His disciples, and chief among them Peter, who earlier said, you are the Christ, the Son of God. You alone have the words of eternal life. To whom else shall we go? I will follow you unto death, Jesus. And Jesus now, when he needs them as witnesses, says, ask them. And Peter says, I don't know him. I never knew him. I am not one of his disciples. And then John switches scenes from the balcony to the courtyard fire, again with Peter, verse 25. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, you also are not one of his disciples, are you? And he denied it and said, I am not. And one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter cut off, asked, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. And so we're back at the fire now, that charcoal fire. And one of those around the fire asks him a second time, "Are you?" And he says the exact same answer, "I am not." And then, unique to John's gospel, he identifies the identity of the third questioner. He says, "One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man Malchus, whose ear Peter had just cut off, and who evidently was with him in the garden and saw Peter there and saw him strike his ear off in an attempt on his life." He says, "Did I not see you in the garden? Wait a second here. I saw you. You were there. You took off my cousin's ear, bro. What are you doing here?" But Peter again denies. He again denies. And we go to the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, to fill in some of the colorful details so you can see some of the drama as this real historical scene comes to life here. Peter doesn't know what to say. He's being asked, he's being bombarded, he's caught, as it were. Listen to how Matthew describes it in Matthew 26. Matthew 26, verse 73, after a little while, the bystanders came up and said to Peter, this is the third time, "Certainly you too are one of them, for your accent betrays you." Then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, "I do not know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. Mark adds even more descriptive detail in chapter 14, verse 70. "But again he denied it, and after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, 'Certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean.' But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know this man of whom you speak.'" How were they so certain that it was Peter? Well, Malchus's cousin was there and witnessed the whole thing. And as the flickering and the light of the flames are flashing across Peter's face, the picture is becoming complete. And notice, Matthew actually gives us another detail in his account, didn't he? In verse 73 there. He said that they could tell by his accent. He says, "Your accent betrays you. We know you are a Galilean." That they could easily observe that his accent was different. He's a Galilean from the north. He doesn't speak like the southern Jews in Judea and Jerusalem speak proper, lofty, academic, scholarly level Aramaic in that day. No, there's something country about his accent. And it betrays him. It gives him away. And we understand that. Even here in Southern California, in our church, you could easily tell if someone from our church is from Texas, the Longhorn State, or Tennessee by their southern drawl. It's obvious. They're not one of us. Something is off. They're not from around here. Even on the various accents in Spanish that we may have for native Spanish speakers. If somebody stands up to you and says, "Buenos dias, soy Sebastián," you know right away, this guy's from Barcelona. He's not from Mexico or another Latin American country, right? The accent betrays. And so here's Peter being bombarded at this fire. Wait a second, I know you. You look familiar. You must be a Galilean. Your accent betrays you, and the light of the fires is flashing across his face, and all of these questions are looming in. And so notice what the synoptics say. He actually invokes a curse on himself. The idea here is, I swear to God I don't know him. That's what he's saying. He's swearing an oath. I'm telling you the truth. May God strike me down if I'm lying, is what he's saying. He may even be cursing them for even suggesting such a ludicrous notion of his identification with Jesus. That's what he's saying. That's how scared he is. That's how faithless he is in this moment of intense pressure and trial. In this moment where in his mind, his life is on the line. But Luke records another detail. Another detail that Luke singularly records in chapter 22, verse 60 and 61. On this third denial, immediately the rooster crows, and evidently Jesus and Peter are within eyesight. And Jesus, as he's standing on the balcony, immediately looks over at Peter, and Peter looks over at him, and they lock eyes. And Peter immediately begins to weep bitterly. And he runs away. He runs away. The sight of his Lord looking at him, not in judgment, with eyes full of compassion and forgiveness, is too much for Peter to bear. And Peter the rock crumbles again to pieces and goes away. He goes away. What a moment. The intensity of that. Sometimes all it takes is a look. Right? Fathers in the room sometimes know this. I remember this was especially true for my oldest two daughters when they were 2 or 3. Not so much for this one. Nothing works for this one. But for the others, if they knew they did something wrong, whether they pinched or bit another at the table or took another's dessert or took an extra scoop of ice cream, all I would have to do is to look at them intensely. And immediately the eyes would well up and the lips would begin to quiver and full-blown cries. Now imagine that shame and horror of a child knowing they had done something wrong. Imagine that and multiply that 1,000-fold in this situation between Jesus and Peter and the way Jesus' piercing look cuts him to the soul. That's what happens. As they lock eyes, Jesus' prophecy is fulfilled through Peter's denial. And Jesus' prophetic words and Peter's failure to speak the right words collide in that moment as the two of them lock eyes in the high priest's house. And Peter has a lot of lessons to learn. He cannot follow Christ until Christ dies for him first. He cannot live faithfully in following Christ until Christ lays down his life for him in death. In death. And yet, this won't be the end of the story for Peter. The lowest of low moments in Peter's life. But it's not the end. And it's not the end because Jesus made a promise. And he made a promise to Peter even before Peter denies him or says he would never deny him in Luke's account. And that's in that same chapter 22, verses 31. If you flip a page over, he says this, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned again, which means when I have restored you back to faith, strengthen your brothers. Strengthen your brothers, Peter. John gives us Peter's denial here. and the other gospel writers, not merely as historical information, but for real practical purposes. That we might read this story, look at Peter as a mirror and see ourselves and our proclivity to also deny Jesus. And that's the first point. Beware of following at a distance. Beware of following Jesus at a distance. Peter's troubles began long before the fire, didn't it? As he's warming himself physically, his heart has already grown cold. He followed Jesus, but at a distance. And it's like that. He followed him close, but not close enough to suffer. Safe, but faithless. And that's a description of much of the Christian life, isn't it? For some of us. We want to be close enough to Christ to receive his blessing. Give me all the good stuff, Jesus. Give me blessing. Give me grace. Give me mercy. Give me divine protection. Give me divine forgiveness. Give me eternal life. Hear my prayers. Increase my faith. Give me all your blessings and benefits. We want to be close enough to Jesus to receive his blessing, but not close enough that we bear his reproach. Not close enough that we're burned by the fire. We want the warmth of the fire. That feels good, but not the heat of the trial. We want to be in the courtyard. That's awesome. We're close, 20 feet away, 30 feet away, but not in the courtroom when our lives may be on the line. Number 2, fear of man can silence faith. Fear of man can silence faith. Peter, with the sword in the garden, is bold, no problem. And suddenly, when he feels threatened, when the prospect of arrest and imprisonment and death is now very real before him in the high priest's house, he is broken by a simple question from a servant girl. It's the fear of man. What does Proverbs 29:25 say? The fear of man is a snare. We're not called to fear men. What did Jesus say? Don't fear man. What can they do? The worst they can do is take your life physically. Fear the one who alone can destroy both body and soul in hell. That's God the Father. Don't fear man, fear God. And if it silenced Peter, it can silence us too. In the office, in the workplace, in the classroom, at school, around friends, at a party, in a social function, at the mall, at the coffee shop, wherever you find yourself, the fear of man is a powerful and effective silencer, isn't it? If we're honest. You're afraid of being ostracized, of being criticized, of losing social status, of losing clout, of being made fun of. No, it's far easier in those moments where we have an opportunity to be a faithful witness to Christ and affirm our convictions and faith in him. It is far easier and more convenient for us to stay silent or to deny, like Peter. You say, yeah, that's different. That's a whole nother level of denial. I mean, come on, Peter, he walked with him 3 years. He sat with him. He was one of his favorites. He was the leader. He was strong. He had all the privileges that we don't have 2,000 years today, and he still denied Jesus. I would never do that. Isn't that exactly what Peter said? Even if they all fall away, these 11 are weak sauce. I'm the real deal. I will never deny you and fall away. No, it's the same for us. You say, well, I wouldn't deny him like that. I mean, I always have, maybe, but denial can come in many forms. It can come verbally in your profession, in your confession, and how you live by action, but it can also come in different forms. Did you ever think about every time you knowingly and willfully choose to sin, that is a denial of your faith in Jesus Christ? Every time you choose self-gratification and pleasure, that is a denial of your faith in Jesus Christ. Every time you say, I want this, I want that, my will be done, not yours, that is a denial of faith in Jesus Christ. That's all of us, isn't it? And number 3, our words can wound our witness. We've been talking about the power of words. Peter didn't just deny. He took his words next level. He swore with oaths and curses. First, he swears before Jesus, I will never deny you. I will follow you unto death. And then he undoes that oath very quickly, just a few hours later, as he swears before men, I do not know this man. Unequivocally. He doesn't even identify him. It's not Jesus of Nazareth. It's no longer my Lord. It's no longer the Son of God, the Christ, which he affirmed earlier. No, it's this man. This nameless man. I couldn't be further removed from him. May God curse me if I'm lying. He swears an oath. Words matter. Words can wound and can cripple our witness entirely. How quickly our tongues can betray our hearts, whether it's by silence, whether it's by compromise, whether it's by omission, whether it's by commission, our words matter. What are we saying? What are we saying about Jesus? Do we know enough of the truth of the gospel to say it accurately? To tell somebody the gospel compellingly? In moments when I'm presented to say something that may come at a social cost for me, or worse, am I opening my mouth and speaking it, or am I staying silent? And number 4, Christ's faithfulness secures our hope. That's the key here. Okay, Peter's failure was real. It was abysmal. It was the worst of the worst. But it wasn't final. And it wasn't final not because of anything inherent to Peter, not because Peter was so tough, not because Peter had unwavering faith, not because Peter was so mentally strong or spiritually strong, and certainly not physically strong. It was all because Jesus had prayed that Peter's faith would not ultimately fail. And that is it. Our faithfulness is anchored in and rests solely upon the person and work of Jesus Christ. Apart from him, we can do nothing. Isn't that what he said in John 15? I am the true vine. It's only by abiding in me, remaining in me, continuing in me, that my eternal life flows into you as branches, like life-giving sap from the source and the tree trunk and root. It's about Christ's faithfulness. It's about Christ's steadfastness. It's about Christ's promises. It's about Christ's sovereign power to keep all those the Father has given him. He said, I am the good shepherd. I lay my life down for my sheep. No one will snatch them out of my hand, because no one is greater than me or the Father. I will lose none of them, including Peter, and including you, and including me. If you believe, if you come to God the Father alone for acceptance through faith in his Son, his perfect life in your place and his substitutionary death in your place, that God promises to redeem and to reconcile and to restore and to bring you into his heavenly presence forever through the glorious resurrection, which is the proof that Jesus is the Son of God. Only if you believe this. So believe this, and you will have eternal life. And so the courtyard scene closes with the sound of a rooster crowing and Peter's bitter tears. The rock crumbles. The bold disciple collapses. The one who swore he would die for Jesus cannot even admit that he knows him. And yet, this is not the end of Peter's story. Nor is it the last time that we see Peter by a charcoal fire. John tells us at the end of his gospel, after the resurrection in chapter 21, that Peter and the disciples were fishing when Jesus appears to them on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, and they catch a massive catch of fish, and they come and they realize it's him, and they come to Jesus and they see him sitting on the shore with breakfast by another charcoal fire. And by one fire, Peter says, "I do not know the man." And by the other fire, Jesus asks him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" By one fire, Peter denies Jesus 3 times. And by the second fire, Jesus gives Peter 3 chances to confess him. "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Lord, you know that I love you." "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Lord, you know that I love you." "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And with the third question, Peter is grieved in his heart and to the depths of his soul that Jesus would ask him 3 times, so he appeals to the perfect power and the knowledge of Jesus, and finally and resolutely and unwaveringly, he says, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." For every denial in which Peter failed to confess him, Jesus, in his rich mercy and grace, gives Peter the chance to reaffirm his faith in him. "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." 1 for 1, 3 for 3. What a reversal. What grace. And not only that, then Jesus recommissions him. He says, "Feed my sheep. Tend my sheep, feed my lambs." The denier becomes a confessor. The sheep becomes a shepherd. And the coward becomes a bold gospel preacher. The broken pieces become Peter, Petros, the rock once again, and a living portrait of the grace of Christ to restore and redeem, which is always greater than the grossest failures of his people to follow him in faith. Before the rooster crows, fear may silence faith, but after the resurrection, grace speaks a better, irresistible, transformational word and restores every disciple like you and like me back into faithful service and following him.